Welcome to Visionary Voices Exchange podcast. I'm your host, Janet LaBreck, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here to discuss everything that you thought you knew about blindness. We're available on every major streaming platform, so let's get ready to dive in. Welcome, everyone. We have an incredibly talented and very interesting guest joining us today to talk about tactile technology. And here we are in the midst of all this growing technology with artificial intelligence, and there are different versions of tactile technology. And certainly for individuals who may be blind or low vision, we wanted to talk about technology and how Tactile Images, John Olson, who is the co-founder of Tactile Images, how he thinks about tactile technology and the solutions that individuals who are blind and low vision may benefit from this type of technology. And it is not your traditional way that we think about the raised lines on a piece of paper that can sort of outline a graphic or a photo. This is very much different, multi-sensory, interactive. And so, John, I wanted to, first of all, welcome you and invite you to let us know about tactile technology. And number one, give us a little bit of information about your own background and how you got to this place where you wanted to share and certainly work on providing tactile technology solutions for individuals.
So, Janet, first of all, it's terrific to be with you here today. You and I go back, a decade or so, and you've been so helpful in spreading the word on what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to take you back 19 years. I was winding up one career, and one day I was beginning to wonder, and this was after decades of having been a photographer. I started out as a very young man as a photojournalist, and this was a time long before digital. This was when they shot film and when there were magazines and people actually looked at magazines. And at that time, there was a magazine called Life magazine. Now, this was way before cable news. This was way before the internet. So everybody got their news differently. And at that time, the premier place to be, especially if you were a photographer, was Life magazine.
Oh, yeah.
You don't remember it. I know you're not old enough.
I do remember.
But I don't know who's laughing in the background there, but that's not very nice. So Janet's by far not old enough. But anyway, so when I was a very young man, when I was 12 years old, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so every Wednesday, I grew up in Minnesota. My father had been a farmer and he was a seed corn salesman. And every Wednesday, Life magazine showed up at in the mail. And I remember looking at the pictures throughout the magazine. And that time, the Vietnam War was just in its infancy. And while I didn't tell my father that what I really wanted to do, I knew in my heart I wanted to be a war photographer. So what I can assure you now is careful what you wish for, because that's what God gave me. He gave me that opportunity. And as a 19-year-old, I went to Vietnam. The Army got me first before I could get there on my own. But I was incredibly fortunate. I got the best job the Army could have ever offered me. I became the sole combat photographer in Vietnam for the daily newspaper Stars and Stripes. Now, for your listeners who don't know Stars and Stripes, it's a terrific newspaper. It's still published today, and it's published around the world, and it goes to all of our troops and everywhere throughout the world. And there were, in Vietnam, there were about 6 reporters, and I was the sole photographer. And they had a bureau in Saigon, and it was a terrific place to work. They let me go wherever I wanted to go throughout Vietnam and cover whatever I wanted to cover. The only caveat was none of the reporters had to come with me because they knew if they came with me, they'd get shot at. So it was great freedom. And in early 1968, there was a battle. It was became a historic battle called the Tet Offensive. And during the Tet Offensive, I made some photographs that became well known, and it launched a lifelong career. My pictures became they were seen throughout the world. I won the Robert Capa Award, which is a significant award for covering wars. And at 20 years old, I went under contract to Life magazine, and at 21, I went on staff.
Mm-hmm.
So, fast forward a number of decades later, I was wondering what it was like for people who did not have access to photographs. I wondered what it was like because imagery had been so critical to my life. And I remember the day. It was Labor Day weekend, 2008, where I was sitting in my office and just thinking about that issue. Now, I'd never met a blind person, but I wondered what it was like. And it was on that day that I committed myself to developing a means by which people who are blind, people who have low vision, people who are disabled can acquire visual information through alternative means. A lot of really smart people told me that what I wanted to do was impossible. And there's nothing in this world that motivates me more than being told I can't do something. And while it took us a number of years, we developed a process, we developed a technology. And in 2016, we had our first museum introduction at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And fast forward a decade, we're now in hundreds of museums. We have traveling exhibits. We're developing new technology. And our goal is a very simple one. It's to change the world for people who don't have vision.
And so, from your background, obviously at a very young age, and taking the technology from what you've previously learned about photography and obviously the experience that you've had in that particular area of expertise and field, and the fact that you've never met a blind person previously, what were your longer term goals? And when you actually thought about the question, how do individuals who are blind perceive photos, and how do they interpret the information that's in a photo? Did you set out to do this in stages? Was it a long-term goal? How did it actually come about in terms of the actual progress as well as the process?
So that's really a good question. I've heard it said that there have been many of us out there, sighted people, who seek to provide a vehicle for people who are blind to acquire visual information. I've also heard it said that most of us who are sighted come to the blind community and tell them what they need. I tell the story that if my wife were here, if she were part of the podcast today, and one of your listeners asked us or asked her, "Is your husband a good listener?" She would say, "Absolutely not. He doesn't listen to anyone. He does what he believes in." I knew when it came to developing a useful technology, I had to listen to the blind community. I was very fortunate. Very early on, I connected with an organization that invited me to their headquarters to speak with a small group of people who were blind. And it was there that I was able to create a relationship that has run more than a decade. And well, there are many people out there that are incredibly generous with saying, "I developed something that serves the blind community well." That's not really accurate. It's the blind community that provided me with the feedback that allowed me to take what I was in the process of doing and do it the right way, and in such a way where uh, people who are able to experience our exhibits at a museum, at a science center, at a library, they can engage in a development of a technology that the blind community deserves a big thank you for.
Mm-hmm. And what was that experience like, John, in terms of, meeting with a small group of individuals who are blind? First of all, it must have been overwhelming for you to, here you are, these are people you've never met before, but you've reached out and you wanted to have those conversations about, what they would think about this type of technology, or just gaining information about what some of the barriers may be that individuals who are blind or low vision present with all the time, never mind thinking about technology. So what was that experience like?
Well, I'll share just a few things that I recall. I remember a meeting in which an individual was there who stopped us in the middle of conversation and said, "We're blind. We're always going to be blind. We need as much help as you can provide in creating a mental picture." And they went on to say that as much descriptive information that aligns with the tactile image, as much information as you can provide helps them create that mental picture. And it was there we truly understood that the audio component and audio effects are a significant part of that. So when we did the famous painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware, you can hear the wooden boats creak. You can hear the oars in the water and the rushing water. There's so many subtle components to making a tactile image of value to the community. That's and that happens to be one of them. Mm-hmm. But we have another huge advantage, and the advantage we have is the blind community has been so underserved for so long that they're appreciative of someone who said, "Let's do this. Let's find a way to communicate this information." And so, because individuals who are blind have been left behind for so long, thinking about the ways that you can utilize this type of technology to change that paradigm for individuals, what kinds of settings were you thinking about? Are we talking about, photography that people can use in general, the descriptive photography that comes from looking at a photo, how you get to the point where you're saying, okay, these are individuals who have never historically had this kind of access. What are they missing out on? And so what types of environments did you actually think about starting in? And why did you choose that type of an environment? So I'd like to answer this in two ways. There are those outlets that we feel are natural for our work. One is our museums. Another is science centers. Worldwide, there are 90,000 museums. And their mission statements seek to serve all with equality. And the interesting thing about that is that while the mission statements are very noble and reflective of what conceptually we could do together, the reality is you have to convert them one at a time to understand that there is a community out there that's underserved. And if you give them the opportunity to participate, to be included in your environment, you're going to serve a valuable customer base. So we're in a number of museums, a number of science centers. Libraries are a terrific locale that we seek to be in. There's an endless opportunity to serve this community.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And so one of the environments that I think that was obviously very successful was looking at how the blindness community engages in their own respective communities nationally, and looking at ways that this technology could shift that paradigm from, well, I don't really go to this type of a place like a museum because there really isn't much there for me to benefit from. Although there are lots of different types of exhibits in museum settings, you decided that the museum industry was one of the places that you wanted to start with. So why was that? And how did you navigate both the conversations, not only with the blindness community, but also navigating those critical conversations with the museum industry? So the curators, the people that are in charge of the educational forums and educational activities that happen in museum settings. And how did you convince them to be able to, number one, understand this concept, but number two, understanding how they were in fact disconnected from, in this case, the blind and low vision community, from being able to effectively participate in their exhibits?
Well, this may shock you, shock your listeners. Let me put it into perspective. I knew nothing about the museum community. I know nothing about art. So it was a great learning curve. And if you get up early, stay up late, work 7 days a week, and refuse to quit, you can make headway.
Mm-hmm.
And luck can occur. And we've all of those components were very much part of my first decade in bringing this to life. There are organizations. Every museum, every science center seeks to serve the blind community. The reality is, you have to drill down. You have to find out if they're serious. Are they serious in the long term? Who are the right people? And how do you capture their attention? And it's tough.
Yeah.
It's getting easier some days. I would say we're probably in 200 museums at this point. So that only leaves. Let me see if I can do the math. 89,800 yet to go. So I have to live a long time, Janet. But I want to touch on one aspect of change. There are two groups that need to change. There are the museums to understand what the opportunity is, and then there's the blind community that has been underserved for so long. They've got to give these organizations a chance to prove themselves, and at times both aspects of what I've just described are hard to achieve. Meaning, again, the blind community has been so underserved for so long that when they hear about an art exhibit for the blind, there may be some hesitance. And about 2 years ago, we really had an opportunity to see what we might be able to achieve if we do a full court press. And we were given the opportunity to come to the state of Nebraska, go under contract for the Commission for the Blind. And what we said we were going to do was to create relationships between the Nebraska Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired and the major museums throughout the state. We created relationships with 5 museums,
Mm-hmm.
top tier organizations. And over the course of about 15 months, we developed 106 weeks of tactile exhibits that traveled throughout the state. And toward the end of that period of time, the Commission for the Blind organized a bus tour of anyone within the state, anyone who was blind. I don't think they
Mm-hmm.
even had to be within the state.
Sure.
to go on a multi-day 3-museum tour. Following that, I had the opportunity in front of a large audience of people who are blind to say, anyone who was on that tour who would like to speak on camera and tell me their experience, good or bad, I'd love to hear it. And we had 10 people who wanted to speak, which I was surprised about. And the takeaway was the following. Almost to a person, they said, we really weren't that interested in coming on this. Finally, we decided we'd give it a try. And then the follow-up to that was, and it was terrific. They had no idea as to what the end result would be. So this is really a case of the blind community having to give it a try, and museums saying this is a community that deserves being served.
You're absolutely right. And what it also speaks to is the disability community in general has a tagline that says, nothing about us without us. And that is so important because you can have all the good intentions that you may want to have, but if you don't engage the community first, you have no way of knowing, number one, is it even something that's desirable? In this particular case, being able to have an interest in being included in visiting a local museum and participating in exhibits. And so, had you not done it that way, then you could have had a very different outcome. And I was there on that opening, and I didn't know what to expect going in. My one experience that I had with a museum was not a positive one because I tried to step forward, and I guess, from my perspective, I didn't think that I was stepping as far as they said I was, but I was trying to get close enough clearly to see the image, the painting. And immediately someone came from out of nowhere and said I needed to step back or leave the museum, that I could not, step any closer for fear of damaging, I guess, the painting, which I certainly understand that part of it, but I was trying to explain that, look, I'm legally blind and I want to be able to see it, and I need to just stand a little bit closer. I won't go any closer, but I'm just trying to, see what the painting is. And they said, no, you can't do that. And after that experience, I had not visited a museum for years later. And because, number one, there wasn't this type of interactive technology that makes it multisensory so that you can have a choice in how you choose to replicate, the painting. So maybe spend a couple of minutes talking about your technology and how it transforms, to, how do you want to say, I'm not sure I'm saying this correctly, something that's 2D into something that you transform and it becomes multisensory.
Yeah, I'd love to walk your listeners through how we do what we do. We have a production facility a couple hours above New York City where we do the bulk of our production with some exception. The first stage of what we do is the artwork gets transformed from a 2D image to 3D data. So we have digital sculptors on 3 continents around the world that's their responsibility. So these are people that would normally work for the games industry and do characters. And there's some incredibly talented people out there who digitally sculpt. Now, in our case, they need to sculpt to our requirements, and there's a uniqueness about that. I'll touch on in just a minute. But the first step of what we do is we make an image available to a sculptor, and it's their responsibility to take over from where the artist left off. So if it's a Da Vinci piece, it means they've got a lot of legacy to carry on from. So they make a bas-relief sculpt of this image that needs to be as close to the original as can be done. And we take that data and then we do a conversion process to it, and then it gets sculpted, digitally sculpted on a machine that carves away from a large block of substrate. So it's not 3D printed. It is material is removed in this process. So we end up with a piece that is lacking the color from the image, but it's raised relief. And from there, we print the image data onto the relief. Once we've done that, we embed sensors throughout the art, and we have a control panel at the bottom of the art with Braille, and there are electronics that control all of this. So when you press a button or touch a sensor, it gives you audio feedback, explains the art, explains the coordinate that you're at on the art, what it's about. Now, I want to deviate from what I'm saying for just a second. Early on in our learning curve, we went to a national convention for the blind. 3,000 blind people, one hotel. And there we showed a sample of what we were intending to do. And we invited 5 people to become advisors to us for a year. And they ranged in age from 11 years old to 84. They gave us a lot of valuable information. One year later, we went back to the next year's national convention where we re-met with our consultants. And one of them took us aside and said, and this was a woman in her early 60s. She'd been blind for maybe about 5 years. And she took me aside to say, listen, I don't think you fully understand what you're doing for us. And she proceeded to tell me that when she was experiencing one of our pieces, that she didn't need to have a docent on her left or a friend on her right to explain to her what they thought about the artwork. That during that period of time, she was in control of the experience. And the light bulb went off in my head as to what this was all about. And it was far more than experiencing art or experiencing a photograph. It's control, it's having control of the experience. So in that regard, that's what I often think of. One of the things we've seen, and we saw this in Nebraska when we were at one of the museums that was hosting one of the weeks of traveling exhibits. We had a group come in, and we had blind people having a conversation with sighted people who they'd never met before, where they were, I'll say, arguing about the validity of the piece, meaning which is the best art.
Yeah.
So this is about inclusion.
Absolutely.
And so in that regard, this is far more than art. I had a sighted person once say to me, "Why do you do this? What do blind people know about art?" And my response was, "What do I know about art?" It's really about, it's the experience. It's the peripheral benefits of that interaction with somebody you don't know or didn't know 20 minutes ago, and it's the conversation. At one of these events, I said, and this was an art exhibit, I said to the group of blind visitors, "Who's got a favorite piece?" everybody had a favorite piece, and they all
Sure.
wanted to be heard. That's what this is about.
Absolutely. Well, I have to just say that one of, I think, the most powerful experiences I have ever had in a museum setting was the opening of that event. And what made it so powerful was the fact that, number one, the exhibits were all audible and multisensory. And not only that, though, what made it so powerful was the fact that you took the time to find surviving Vietnam veterans who were in that particular battle. And we got to hear their stories. We got to hear their voices for the first time. It isn't often that many of us ever have the chance to say that we have heard the story from a veteran who was there. And the fact that this technology solution allowed us access to that, and then what made it even more powerful was the fact that some of the individuals were there in person. So we got to hear them in person as well as interact with the actual exhibits that took place in the museum, in the Smithsonian Museum during that exhibit period of time that it was there. And so you just could not walk out of that museum setting with a whole different perspective, not only on accessibility, but also on inclusion and what true inclusion really means. And that's what I think that your technology offers is a new way of thinking about inclusion. And inclusion doesn't mean we're all just in the same room together. It also means that we can experience whatever is going on in that particular room, and we can customize it to how we best need to experience it. And that involves choice, and that involves having the freedom to be able to make that decision and to self-determine, what is going to be meaningful to anyone who is engaging with this type of technology solution. And so I think that, number one, I want to say thank you to you for having the vision to even think about this as an issue for the blind community, but also leveraging your expertise and your experience in the field of photography to help bring, I think, a new vision for all of us as the blindness community. And I also want to make sure that people know that your exhibits are in multiple settings across the country, and that if you're interested in looking at any of the exhibits, how can people go to your website? That's one way to learn more information about what you do and how it's done. But also, I want to encourage our listeners to, if you're in your community and an exhibit is going on in your respective museum or some other setting where you think this technology can be valuable to individuals who are blind or low vision, talk to the people in that setting and encourage them, to make sure that they're thinking about ways that they can improve access and inclusion for the community as a whole, not just for the blind community, but for the community as a whole, because we often know that if individuals who are blind or low vision can benefit from it, then lots of times that means that there are others in the community who can also benefit from it and find it of value. And it brings new audiences into those particular settings. So I want to thank you for joining us here today, and feel free to provide some information for contacting you.
Well, this is terrific. For over a decade, you've been so helpful toward this movement. I can't stress that enough. We are tactileimages.com, and that's just tactileimages.com. Go to the website. Send us an email at John, John Olson, Olson at tactileimages.com. And we'd love to. We want to be everywhere. We want to service the community throughout the United States, North America, and then beyond. Love to talk to your listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thank you for being a fantastic collaborator for the blind community.
My pleasure.